Right, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending. Yes, so within about 20, 25 minutes, I'll give you an overview of business continuity planning and picking up a little bit on what we've learned from coronavirus. So what I'm planning to cover, Mandy's read this through, so I won't go through it again, but as I say, it's an overview and trying to give, for those of you that are new to the subject, what the various aspects of business continuity are. For those of you that already have plans, and I see that just under half of you who've kindly responded to the poll have got plans of some sort, just to make sure that your plans do cover all the bases. Okay, so let's start with a definition of business continuity. So what business continuity about is dealing with events that perhaps have a very low possibility of occurring, but should they occur, they have a potentially disastrous effect on our organizations and companies and even its ability to function. And unfortunately, coronavirus has been an excellent example of that. I think we, certainly in Europe, became a little bit complacent because we'd escaped SARS and other potential infections. And of course, the effect of coronavirus has been major for all organizations. Obviously, some dealt with it better than others, but we now understand what that definition means, I think, from the experience of coronavirus. So what have we learned from coronavirus? Well, I think for many organizations, we realize that we can manage without offices. People are working at home, and there's quite a lot of evidence that people have been as productive or even more productive working at home. If we don't have offices to travel to, then we don't need to commute, and therefore we don't rely so much and less impacted by disruptions to travel. I think, and I'll come back to this point at the end of the presentation, I think we've also learned as organizations to become more resilient. This coronavirus and the number of lockdowns we've now been through, we have built up a certain amount of resilience. The initial impact, we've dealt with, and we kept going in many cases. I'm not saying that has not been problematic and it's not been stressful for a lot of people, but that's where we are. However, just because we have managed to deal or are dealing with coronavirus, let's not get complacent. There are other near catastrophic events that could occur to us as organizations. Probably the one that is unfortunately one of the more likely ones and could be quite devastating are cyber attacks. We are heavily reliant at the moment on technology to keep things going, and obviously if our systems go down, we are in big problem. And then there's also, unfortunately, the increasing occurrence of ransomware incidents as well. So the technology is under threat, and we need to plan for those possibilities. Unfortunately, terrorism is still around, and the possibility of an explosion or even a bomb threat can be very disruptive to organizations. And although I've said that many organizations can manage without offices, of course, those of you that are in manufacturing distribution, you'll have warehouses, factories, distribution centers. So even a fire could be quite devastating to those of you with those sort of facilities. We're likely to have more extreme weather events probably through climate change, and something like a flood, particularly locally, can have quite a devastating effect, not only on the lack of facilities, but on the difficulty of moving around while those flood waters are there. And then even if we've got on top of our own business continuity plans, what about our key suppliers? How resilient are they? I think, and we'll probably hear a little bit more about Brexit from Paul, but I think Brexit has indicated the importance of supply chains, perhaps a greater awareness of that now. So there's no reason to be complacent, unfortunately, when we're thinking about business continuity. The main phases typical of a major incident. So we start with the emergency response. Now, depending on the type of event, it may be that the focus is on saving lives. Obviously, if it's a fire or a bomb threat, that's the first concern. And again, depending on circumstances, there may be an opportunity to protect assets, but obviously you don't want people spending time doing that if their safety is at stake. But there are other scenarios where that wouldn't be the case. If it's say an IT related incident, it can be very useful to gather information at the outset. So, for example, take screenshots of what's appearing on people's computers, because that will help identify what the issue is and speed up its resolution. So different approaches depending on the circumstances. The next phase is the incident management, which is basically where senior management of the organization takes control of the situation. So their main objectives are to manage that incident. Again, there may be safety concerns. It might be important to check that people are all accounted for, if people have had to go to hospital, taking care of that. Managing the communications is particularly important. There are instances, quite a few instances of organizations that have managed the incident okay, but they've made it much worse by poor communication, not being showing empathy to the people impacted. And of course, these days you have the additional aspects of social media. So you should have policies, for example, that restrict what your employees would say about incident affecting organization, but there will be people outside of your control that will post on social media. So you really need to monitor that and have counters to any misinformation that is put out about that incident. And as well as taking measures to reduce the costs of the impact of the event, what is often more important, in some cases more expensive, is to safeguard the reputation of organization. That damage can be longer lasting and can be quite extensive in many cases. After a period of time when you're on top of the situation, then you're moving into the business continuity phase. So that is where you typically concentrate on the critical activities of your organization and make sure that you're managing to maintain those while you've got a loss of resources. If I can move on to the components of the business continuity management system. So the core of system, and what I'm talking about here is a system that is scalable. So depending on the size of organization, all this might be wrapped into one plan. In larger organizations, there'll be different separate plan components. So in my view, you should start with a business continuity strategy. So this is really, why are you developing business continuity? What are the main drivers for that? That will then inform the planning that you undertake. So I've mentioned emergency response. Now, hopefully you already have a fire evacuation plan and hopefully a different plan for bomb threats. The major incident
management plan, this is the plan that guides that incident management team to manage the overall event. And it's quite useful to have some pre-prepared checklists, for example, an agenda for the first meeting of that team, so they can really focus down on what they need to deal with. Some communication templates might be in there as well, that can be adapted for a particular event. So the whole point of that plan is to prepare people and to manage the event as efficiently as they can. And then when it moves on to this business continuity phase, the plans there are more to do with how you maintain the business with the reduce resources that you have. Now, supporting that are some other documents. So probably many of you have undertaken risk analysis. You might have corporate risk registers. That's a good starting point. What you want to do really is to extract those risks that have low probability but high impact, rather than the day-to-day business risks that you all will normally manage with. Probably the hardest work to do with business continuity is the business impact analysis. So this is identifying the critical activities and working through what their dependencies are in terms of the different departments involved, external suppliers, service providers, and the IT systems that they rely on, deciding how long you can manage without those systems operating, how up to date the data needs to be, what the minimum staffing is required for those activities. So there's a fair bit of work to do there, but it's certainly worthwhile, and that will inform the strategy, make sure you have a good, well-focused, robust plan. A useful document is a business continuity policy. So although you'll have people wanting to know what you're doing about business continuity, you don't necessarily want to share your business continuity plans with all and sundry for some commercial confidentiality reasons. But a short business continuity policy, which states your commitment to business continuity, can be shared with your employees, contractors, customers, insurance companies, and it can be worthwhile producing. Depending on the incident, if it's an information security incident, then you no doubt have an information security plan, and there needs to be a link between that and the major incident management plan. In my view, information security incidents are a subset of major incidents. They're important, they will be major incidents in most cases, but there needs to be that liaison. And then if the IT systems go down, the IT disaster recovery plan is all about how quickly you can get those systems back up and running. Many of you have now got cloud systems, but I'd warn against some complacency there. Depending on the contract you have and how much you paid for it, you aren't necessarily going to get those systems back that quickly, certainly not immediately. I mean, cloud is a good marketing concept, but at the end of the day, those systems will be on a physical data center very much on the ground somewhere. So that's all the plans that you would need, but it's important that you test those plans. And to do that, you need to run exercises. It's good to see that of the people who respond to the poll, and thanks again for people doing that, quite a few of you run exercises a couple of times a year, which is excellent. Some of you will run them once a year, which is, I think, quite acceptable, but others have not run them for quite a while, and some of you have never run an exercise. In fact, over a third of the people who respond to the poll have not run a business continuity exercise. The other advantage of running exercise is it enables people to rehearse their business continuity roles. And certainly when I've run exercises, I've seen people that sometimes quite uncomfortable because it's different from their day job. There may be more pressure, there may be more focus on themselves. So why not try out those roles in a safe environment that an exercise provides for you, and then you've got the confidence that when a real incident occurs that you can manage that. So who's involved in business continuity? Well, if you go back to the 3 phases, emergency response can be all employers. Anyone could discover a fire, receive a bomb threat, have their screens go down. So everyone needs to be aware that they need to report that incident as quickly as they can. And as I said before, perhaps gather some information if that's appropriate. For the incident management team, that typically is drawn from the more senior management of the organisation. Obviously, you don't have to meet physically these days. You can do this via Teams calls if that's more appropriate. But in addition to senior management, you certainly want a comms specialist in that team. Quite often you'll need an HR person because of the welfare of staff that often is state, but also for communicating to staff, having the contact details. And facilities management, IT, will also generally be part of that incident management team. Once that incident is dealt with, then there is the business continuity leads that take over. They're the people who've got the good operational knowledge of the service or department that needs to keep going. They will deal with the situation when they have reduced resources to keep everything going. And the important role here is one of business continuity coordinator. So you have someone who pulls this together, who informs the incident management team of what the situation in unfolding situation is, that liaises between the different business continuity leads. But it's important that it doesn't, all the business continuity responses don't lie on the shoulders of the business continuity coordinator. As well as that probably being a bit unfair, they probably don't have sufficient knowledge of all the aspects of the organisation, and it's very much a liaison role that works best on that. So I said I'd say a little bit about resilience. So there's a definition there. I think the way I would contrast business resilience and business continuity is that business continuity is really dealing with an event and trying to get back to how things were before, whereas business resilience in some cases is almost looking at this as an opportunity to do things differently. And I think, again, in coronavirus, organisations have found that it's forced some organisations to move into online trading rather than traditional retail, for example. And therefore, you're almost anticipating things will change, and that's probably not a bad viewpoint to start with. And in particular, it does require a good focus on risks and vulnerabilities. That is quite key to business resilience. It's an integrated thing. It isn't something that can be departmentalized. It's got to bring together different management disciplines to focus on performance in a coherent way. And really understanding the interesting parties outside the organisation and how they and the dependencies on them can help support your strategic goals and objectives. And then an interesting point is that you can't be a resilient organisation. There is not a British standard for, or an international standard for business resilience as there is for business continuity. You can only hopefully become more resilient from the measures that you take.